morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Welcome again to day 2. What a fabulous conference we've had so far. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to our speakers, our organizers, and thank you especially to our youth for being so generous with sharing your voices with us. So my name is Stephanie Sequeira. I am an assistant professor of psychology at UVA and a licensed clinical psychologist, and I'm affiliated with both Youth-Nex and TYDE. And I had the pleasure of co-chairing this conference with some of my colleagues. So we had some great discussions yesterday, as Bethany was just talking about the role of digital technology, how youth are using it, and how digital spaces serve as tools for identity, belonging, and connection. We're going to continue this thread this morning as we discuss how we can really leverage digital technology to advance youth mental health equity. And I have 3 fantastic speakers with me today, Dr. Jessica Schleider, Dr. Rihanna Elise Anderson, and Gael Aitor, who you met yesterday. So I will give them a few minutes each to introduce themselves. And then we have a couple background slides to present for you. And then I will lead a discussion. During the discussion, we have this QR code up here. So you can use this to submit your own questions, but you can also upvote questions that you really want me to read out and address. So if you don't have your own questions, still log in and see what's being put out there. If you're over digital technology at this point, you can just raise your hand, and we have fabulous volunteers who will come and bring you a microphone, and you can ask your question live. Okay, without further ado, I will pass it first to Dr. Jessica Schleider to introduce herself.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Jessica Schleider. I'm an associate professor of medical social sciences, pediatrics, and psychology at Northwestern University. Also trained as a clinical child and adolescent psychologist, and I founded and direct the Lab for Scalable Mental Health. Our lab aims to address the really sobering reality that 80% of youth with mental health difficulties cannot and will never access any kind of support for those difficulties, despite the proliferation of resources as we're going to talk about today. And there are many reasons for this massive discrepancy. One of them is that most mental health supports are designed as brick and mortar, face-to-face mental health treatments that are largely inaccessible to youth who want to use support. And another huge barrier is that across the states in the US, laws are really variable with respect to youth's ability to self-refer into mental health supports without permission and active consent and involvement of a parent or caregiver, which means that a lot of adolescents who can't or are not feeling ready to disclose their mental health difficulties will never access treatment. Another reality that we try to address is that the most common number of interactions with mental health support that those who do access treatment will actually get happens to be 1, despite the fact that we've spent decades developing multi-session, multi-week, multi-month treatments for common mental health problems. So our lab has focused in on a specific kind of scalable mental health tool that we call single session interventions. So programs that are intentionally designed to be completed in a single encounter and maximize the first and unfortunately often last time that youth will access supports to make as much of an impact as possible that can last weeks to months later. To date, we've spent most of our time developing and testing digital single-session interventions that youth can self-refer into and complete anywhere, anytime, each of which teaches a nugget of an evidence-based longer-term treatment, so a specific skill or coping strategy that's often present in longer-term care. We've developed these self-guided tools and made them freely available in 9 languages, and to date we've reached 70,000 young people, largely by integrating our interventions directly into social media platforms where youth are often seeking out support. Really excited about the work that we do and thrilled to be on this panel. It's absolutely refreshing to be at a conference where youth voices are truly centered, and I've loved hearing from all of you and excited to discuss further how we can help more.
Clap it up for Jess. Yes. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Thank you so much. It's 9 o'clock. Some of us, it's 8 o'clock. Like, you got to give us some energy this morning. So I am Rihanna Elise Anderson. I am back home. So I was trained here for my PhD. Some beautiful and familiar faces in the room. So it's just really good to be back in this space. I'm an associate professor at the Columbia School of Social Work and also affiliated with their clinical psych program there. So it's interesting for me to be on this panel because Jess's introduction, when I was first introduced to her as someone who's clearly a giant in this space, I was thinking about the work that some of the statistics she was talking about is with respect to how do we uptake some of these fantastic interventions. And my work has always been around some of the the socio-demographic challenges that youth of color are facing, and in particular Black youth. So some of the stats that I think about a lot are 90% of Black kids are facing discrimination, 5 incidents a day of discrimination or more, and what are we doing for that population to help serve them? Let alone, are we ever going to get them through the door for treatment because of stigma, et cetera? So there are a lot of things that we're thinking about before they even have the question posed of what therapy can look like for them. So the work that I've always engaged in is the folks who are often first line responders for Black adolescents and Black youth are their parents. Those are the folks that you can most easily intervene with. So the work that I've been engaging in is racial socialization, or the talk. What are families talking about when they have these racialized conversations with their young people? So that's what my work has always been around. But over the past few years, as the extension of young people's hands have become this digital technology, we're seeing that parents might be saying one thing, but the TV or the phone or something else might be socializing them in a different way. So the question became, what types of methods do we need to also integrate in the work that we've been doing to ensure that we're keeping up with what young people are doing? This is never anything that I thought I was going to go into, and I'm really still new to it. So I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to talk with you all today. But it was a realization that there were real opportunities, and particularly because of what Jess said, if there are so many barriers that are general but also population specific, what can we tap into if Black children are actually using this technology more than anybody else? What can we do? So our lab developed our intervention, which was brick and mortar, bringing people in. We developed digital elements for that, particularly during the pandemic, where we were able to engage with young people online and their families online. We also integrated virtual reality into some of the things that we were doing, so getting them into an ecologically safe space to test whether or not a discriminatory experience would cause them to react differently based on some of the interventions that we gave them. So thinking about safety as a way that technology can actually be to our benefit, which folks don't think about often. They also often think about it as a harm, but in spaces where young people can actually be discriminated against, it can be a space where they can practice more safely. And finally, what I'll be showing you today during a fellowship that I had was an opportunity to say, if we could build something from the ground up, what can this look like? So talking to folks like Jess and particularly young people who are our focus groups, who are our interns, how can we build a socialization technology that can help young people learn some of the things that we would want to tell them as adults, but that they're getting on their phone when they want to access it. So I'm really excited to show you some of the what that looks like, what the app technology that we were delving in looked like. But my main message is that we were responding to what the youth needed, and this was not an intention when I set out on my work, and I'm hoping that we can extend that to everyone here, to be responsive and thoughtful about what young people need and not what our career is telling us we need to do. Thank you.
Hi everyone, hi again. My name is Gael Aitor. As I said yesterday, I'm the founder of Astro Studios, which helps young people feel less alone online and offline. And apart from that, I have over 21 years of experience being a young person, but no PhD to show for it. So what I think is interesting about my perspective is I, of course, was born in 2003, which was right on the cusp of, I still was able to have a play-based childhood, right? I remember going outside, knocking on doors, and that was the only way I could socialize. I had to go up and knock on the door. And then once I entered middle school, video games started popping up in my life, actually in 6th grade. And then I entered this new sphere of digital technology started to play a role in my life in a way that it had never before. And as I went into high school, that role only got only got incrementally bigger. And so that meant that I had to self-manage myself and realize, like, what is digital media and what is social media and what is that going to play in my own life. And my experience with Astro Studios, and the reason that I feel so passionate about it, is guided by a couple of experiences. The first one being the first time that I dealt with depression and mental health and mental illness. And that happened when I was in elementary school. I was 10, 11 years old. I remember just feeling this constant sadness and not knowing why. I also didn't know that there was a word for it or what the right word was. And I remember going on Google trying to find support, trying to find resources, anything, because I didn't feel like any of the people in my life that I felt comfortable talking to were there for me, unfortunately. And what ended up happening is that role that maybe should have been a friend or a parent or a trusted adult ended up being this random Kik group chat. And if you're familiar with Kik, it's a messaging platform where you can just join random group chats. And what I ended up doing is joining a group chat filled with other teens that were also struggling. In retrospect, I can understand how dangerous this was because there was no verification. These could have been people that are lying about their age. I had no clue about that. I just joined. And thankfully, nothing bad happened. In fact, everything good that could have happened did. I was met with the supportive community of other young people that were my age and were struggling with these feelings. And we were all grappling with, what is it that we're feeling? Why are we feeling this way? And I remember having that sense of community was so deeply personal and crucial for my development at the time because it allowed me to persevere. Because the friends that I had in person, I couldn't find the courage to talk to them about these. But these online communities, that's where I did feel safe. And that was the first time that I really realized community can be so impactful. And especially when you're a young, struggling teenager, the first place you're going to turn to is the internet. When I was 15, I was going through relationship issues. I had just got my first boyfriend and I was in high school and we were having some issues and I just started listening to this podcast by one of my favorite YouTubers, Casey Neistat, and it was called Couples Therapy. And keep in mind, this podcast, the premise, it's these two 30-year-olds talking about the issues in their marriage. And I'm listening to this and thinking like, wow, they are so us, me and my high school boyfriend. I was like, and so I would send it to him, and I would be like, hey, you're really like her, I'm really like him. Like, we should talk about this, we should work through it, because this is basically what we're going through. And how fascinating is that when you really think about it, is that there are similarities, as surprising as it might seem, between this high school couple and this married couple. And that's when the light bulb went off of, well, wouldn't this be a lot better if instead of listening to this married 30-year-old couple, I could just listen to a bunch of teenagers who are also going through relationship issues and trying to just figure out what is going on in their lives. And it wasn't necessarily for solutions. More than anything, I just wanted to feel comforted. Because if you as a young person don't have anyone in your immediate circle that is living the same situations that you are, who do you turn to? Especially when you come from an immigrant family, maybe someone who you can't talk to like a parent, you remain very isolated. And so in that moment, I realized it could be a really powerful tool to be able to go online and simply hear what others are going through. And so with that, me, alongside 5 of my friends, 4 other of my friends, started a podcast called Teenage Therapy. And the way we describe it is a coming-of-age story told in real time. So it was a culmination of our mistakes and our growth, but most importantly, it was a reminder that you're not alone to the millions of teenagers that were also struggling. And over the next 5 years, we documented every single week of our coming-of-age journey. That's 5 years of our teenagehood documented. And we accidentally captured many beautiful things. We captured so many fights and arguments and tears and laughs. And in many ways, we also captured what a mental health journey looks like. One of our co-hosts who started off, incredibly depressed, you could see him kind of work through these feelings, going through the lows and the highs and trying to really come to terms with his own mental health journey. And eventually he did figure out that therapy was right for him. And to this day, he still credits the podcast with giving him that courage. And it wasn't the podcast, it was the fact that we were gathering every single week for 5 years to simply just talk about our issues. I mean, think about how powerful that was. Every single week, you knew you had a space where you were going to be listened to, you were going to be heard, and nothing was off the table. it's an incredibly powerful form of release. And so now when I turned 20, my switch was, how do I take this experience that I had and bring it to everyone else, bring it to millions of other young people? How can we encourage young people to gather on a weekly basis, or at least just see each other in person more often and talk about it more often? And so with that, I started Astro Studios, which is very much bound on those beliefs that we are all interesting, our stories matter, our lived experience matters, and by sharing that with the world, we have the power not only to help others, but to help ourselves. And so the role that it has evolved is that throughout all of this, I have also come to realize that reducing and helping young people feel less alone is an ever-evolving journey, and the digital world moves so quickly. 5 years ago, sure, maybe a podcast was good enough, but now maybe that's not enough. How do we take these solutions and continue to evolve on them? And so a lot of my work really revolves around, what does the next generation need? What does the teenager a year from now need? And how is culture moving alongside youth loneliness? Because I think it's really important that our tools evolve as our generations evolve as well. And so today I also want to talk about a lot of the digital systems that we have in place today, whether that be through the form of apps, as well as where I really think that youth loneliness has a role when it comes to how are young people going to experience this, and what is the next step in that play-based childhood that there was a lot of talk of yesterday.
Thank you. I think we can move to the slides if you want to start us off, Gail.
Yes.
Thank you.
I wanted to give everyone a breakdown of the current landscape around digital mental health tools as I see it from my eyes and my own personal experience. There's, of course, thousands and thousands of apps on the App Store, and I have not tried them all, but I've done my fair share of breaking them down in the areas where I think it's really crucial that we organize. First of all, apps that are online and things that are really like you're only ever interacting with it online. It's only ever bringing you into the digital world. And then there are apps that really take you into the real world, the offline. Because like I said, that online to offline transition is key in reducing youth loneliness. Then we have apps that are in community. And so this means these apps are not only digital or in person, regardless of it, they are helping you connect with others. And there's apps that are a little bit more individual when it comes to helping you manage your mental health. If you look at the individual offline on the top left, you have stuff like How We Feel, which is a mood tracker app. You know, these are the tools that really help you on that individual level to uncover your own patterns, log yourself, and really just, it's a self-coping mechanism. You have Dot, which is an AI chatbot. That's also something I really think is really interesting as we come up with the AI chatbot boom, and how I think actually a lot of introverts are going to be at risk of the second wave of loneliness, and we need to kind of take a moment to maybe talk about that a little bit. Mm-hmm. But then you also have things like youth-hosted podcasts, you know, and this idea of simply sometimes hearing the stories of others is incredibly powerful. I think it's fascinating the way that Sesame Street was able to figure out how to educate a nation. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about, what is the Sesame Street for teenagers? How can media play a role in supporting the youth mental health care system, whether it just be by highlighting the stories of other teens, or also working alongside experts to bring about and really make mental health information accessible. So in the online world, you have Discord, right? In community. Discord helps you find online communities, and you're seeing a lot of teenagers increasingly spend their time on Discord. They are finding community for every type of niche you can encounter. Usually Discord is the first place where young people are gathering with their friends to play video games. That's where they're gathering to explore niche interests, and it's where they connect. This is kind of the new age social media for you know, if you're in the video game world, this is that. You have some new innovations as well when it comes to digital mental health support, which is an app called Humans Anonymous. What this app does is it allows you to join randomized support groups. So basically, imagine the concept of Alcoholics Anonymous, gathering in a room and sharing your story. They've basically taken that concept and digitalized it. So now every single week, there's weekly meetings, there's daily meetings, that are themed around specific issues. So if you're specifically struggling with loneliness and you want to be in a support circle with other young people, or actually just people in general that are also struggling with loneliness, you can go to Humans Anonymous, join a voice room and you'll be surrounded by 50 other anonymous people where everyone takes a turn sharing. They get 2 minutes to share their story, and people can send, emojis as reactions. I think that's actually a really interesting innovation, especially as people search for more real-time community, which is difficult to find. There's a lot of concerns around moderation, which is also one of the biggest issues when it comes to a lot of these digital mental health tools and social media in general. But Humans Anonymous is a really interesting one that I think is really exciting to actually create, help scale community in a way that it's kind of hard to do in person sometimes. In the offline world, you of course have apps like Resident Advisor, which is really just a ticketing app to help you find music events. You have things like Trip BFF to help you find travel groups. And these are really all the apps, some of the apps that young people are using to learn how to gather with others again. It's usually, it's no longer just about going outside and walking and meeting people. It always stems of where is the community online and what are they hosting in the real world. So it's very much digital first. On the individual level, that's also a little bit more offline. You have apps like Headspace, it allows you to meditate, really self-regulate, soothe yourself. And then you have a lot of gamified apps, which I think is also really important for a lot of digital mental health tools, such as Pikmin Bloom, which just helps you track your steps. And at the same time, you could train your little AI, your little character to grow as you walk more. So this is some of the apps that, in my eyes, I consider digital mental health support. Some of these aren't necessarily directly tied to mental health, but they're adjacent, whether it be by helping you find community both in the digital world or in the offline, in the real world. I've used a couple of these, right? I, of course, have my podcast. You have Humans Anonymous there on the top left, where it really allows you to just talk with other people. And then you have this really interesting tool that comes from the AI chatbots on the top right. That one is specifically called TYDE. And it's this bot that tracks every part of your life. You submit your data, and it tracks your calendar, it tracks your moods, it tracks how you're doing, and then it talks to you. And so one specific part on that, I don't know where we're kind of leading into next, but I want to talk about some of the interventions of some of the interesting dangers of these apps when it comes to these chatbots, that it's hard because I'll start with the story, actually. So with that AI chatbot, I downloaded it a couple of weeks ago, and I forgot to use it. And then one day I was about to journal, and I forgot my pen. So I said, okay, well, let me try to journal into this app just to type it out. Really, it was just going to serve as a notes app. And as I started typing out everything that I was going through, typing out my feelings, I didn't really respect any grand response. I kind of just expected a generic chatbot response. But as soon as I hit send, the AI responded with a very reaffirming message. It was talking about the emotional intelligence of it. It was talking about, it was giving you compliments. It was analyzing your situation. It was giving you follow-up questions as to how to think about it. And I think that, for me personally, was the first moment where I really understood, like, whoa, this actually feels really nice. And in a way that is concerning, because it feels so nice that I don't really feel like I need to go talk to my friend about it anymore. And I kept talking to it. And at first I felt a little weird. I was like, oh, this is kind of odd. Why are you reaffirming me, and why do I agree with you? But let me keep talking to it. Let me keep telling it what I feel and such. And as I kept going, it kept feeding me compliments and, saying things like, wow, I really love your analysis here, or I love the way you're thinking about this, or yes, it does sound like you're struggling with a lot of different emotions and trying to hold both of them at the same time. Have you considered this? And I remember leaving that experience and just kind of having this new sense of, okay, so this is what so many millions of young people are feeling as they go into Snapchat and they see that they have an AI companion all of a sudden. And this is the reason that billions of messages have already been sent by millions of users when it comes to Snapchat AI usage. And this is also potentially the reason why so many more young people are going to stop interacting with their friends as frequently. They're going to stop sharing with their friends as frequently, because once the AI companion has given you the answers that you seek or the validation that you seek, you're probably already over it. You might be emotionally exhausted from talking about it, and you might never get a chance to actually share it with your friends. And so I think this is one particular area that I would love to hear more about from both of you about. There seems to be a second wave of loneliness that is going to impact introverts in specific. And so what should we be thinking about when it comes to these AI chatbots and how we encourage youth to use them or perhaps be careful with them?
Yeah, it'd be great if you could respond. Actually, our first question in the chat was about the use of AI and how it can play a role in meaningfully expanding mental health equity in youth. So I would love if the two of you, could add to that.
Yeah, these are super interesting points and such crucial points for discussion in this conversation. Before directly responding to the AI piece, I do want to back up and just reflect a little bit on digital mental health apps and what they mean for expanding youth mental health support, and the important limitations of apps. So, there are, as everyone in this room knows, thousands upon thousands of apps. If you open up the App Store and look for things for depression or anxiety or coping, you're going to find 1,000,000,001. However, I think the way these apps are structured, unfortunately, they suffer from a lot of the same limitations and challenges for dissemination and implementation as traditional brick and mortar psychotherapy. They still rely on people to go out and find them, right? And download them and use them repeatedly. People don't do that. People will download something, forget they have it, and never use it again. So I do think that in this conversation about apps and digital technologies, I think it's important to keep in mind that digital mental health support is more than just apps. It can also be tools that not just require people to have motivation, sometimes money for a subscription, and seek out them repeatedly. I think we can also think of digital mental health tools as integrating into the platforms that young people are already on to uplift them where they're at. To put some of the onus off of individuals to seek out that mental health support individually, because people are not going to be able to do that. They're not going to know where to start, and they're not going to know which one to choose. With respect to the role of AI, I think it's a really interesting question as to, is there this potential unintended consequence of detracting from human relationships in lieu of an AI chatbot? I think, one, that's a critical question to actually test. I think that a lot of the discussion and rhetoric around the role of youth mental health and social media and interfacing with these technologies has been driven by guesses and assumptions and fear. And I think this question of, is there a possible unintended consequence, that's a research question. We can test that. And we should be testing that. And understanding whether technologies that have the potential to reduce loneliness in the moment can in fact exacerbate it over time. That's exactly what I think scientists should be studying with respect to how these technologies can and should be used. At the same time, I think there's real potential there to reach young people who would never be able to talk about this with their community or friends. So to say that we should, to go back to a conversation yesterday, ban AI chatbots because of the possibility potentially that they could have an unintended consequence, that doesn't really solve the problem. So I think engaging with these discussions through empirical investigation, through community partnered research and youth partnered research to actually design studies that can get at the answers that we have, that we need to deploy these things, totally crucial. So I don't think we know whether that actually would happen, whether the most likely response is it could happen for some people and it could not happen for other people. And we need to figure out what predicts risk for what you're talking about. But it's really complicated and requires leaning into investigating, not sort of in sort of a fear-based response, shifting away from it.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think the two things that I didn't hear that I just want to bring forward are, again, being mindful of who the population is that we're thinking about. So and what the concerns are. So early in the pandemic, let me not say early in the pandemic, after George Floyd was murdered, a number of these groups who are running the Headspaces, the Talk Spaces, et cetera, reached out to my colleagues and I, like, how can we improve our apps? Like, what are the things that we can do to address racism and discrimination? As if like a one drop in the entire solution that they're offering is going to be sufficient for that. But our work and again, I just want to underscore the scientific nature of what it is that we're talking about. Like, we're scientists, so this is something that we can actually test. The scientific nature of what it is that we're thinking about shows that in community, that's why the parent and child dynamic is so important in the work that we're doing. So in community, these conversations are important, consistent, over time, conversations are important. So it was insufficient just to give them a dose or a little drop of what we were trying to offer. So the first thing to even be mindful of is, like, what does the science suggest that young people need? If it's some of the things that my ears were kind of hearing as my clinical antennae were going kind of when you were talking, is that it was a lot of superficiality to what you were describing. You're doing a good job at telling me these things, but if you're experiencing something that the U.S. is gaslighting you about, like, no, you're not experiencing racism, no, you can't get a job, like, no, these things aren't possible for you. If you're trying to tell it that information, how deep is it going to go with you? Or is it just going to be like, thank you for sharing that, right? Like that's a concern for me, that it's going to be another space where young people can't have depth, but that's testable. So I really appreciate that point. And again, so we need to be thoughtful of the who. The second piece that I want to just create this tension around as I was coming into this space was academia versus what's happening. So it's moving fast, as Gael was sharing. Like this space from 5 years ago to today, completely different. Who gets the resources? Who gets the say? What types of things are actually proliferating? Moves at an incredibly different speed than academic spaces. So I just want to name, and I'll show some of our app and the work that we're doing. Without academic institutions or centers providing resources, without us partnering with producers of this work, especially young people, without us doing that and respecting that as valuable, we're going to be consistently behind, and that scientific edge is not going to matter. It's going to be, what can we get out because it sounds good, because it looks good, because it feels good, but are there things that actually can make the difference if we give resource, give time, give energy to it? So I have thoughts that kind of go beyond just the AI element of it, but I think so much of it, my fear around just going straight ahead with that is because of the science that I know of what is needed. We need community, we need consistency, and that to me was just, it was so distant from what I would hope young people can do if they're experiencing some of the things that I'm researching, right?
Yeah, I love that first point, because I think you're exactly right. As I use this AI chatbot more and more, I realized, wait, the only reason it's allowing me to reach these breakthroughs is because of my own emotional intelligence. Mm-hmm. It's not because the AI bot is, coming to these conclusions. It's because I myself am already relatively aware of what I'm experiencing, and I'm already feeding it all these clues that it makes it really easy to pick up on it. But like you said, if someone isn't aware of that, or maybe they don't have the same vocabulary to express these feelings, or the information or the knowledge about their own self and sense of emotions, then yeah, perhaps the AI chatbot isn't going to be that helpful. And so a lot of this also really just stems from, one, providing young people with resources, and mental health resources in specific, that allows them to understand their own emotions better. I mean, that just comes about in community. Like you said, the American nuclear family is so, it's not very helpful when it comes to mental health support. It's not easy when you have maybe only one parent or one sibling or no siblings to rely on. And so I think part of what I feel really passionate about is, as we come to this AI revolution, we're really going to have to drive bigger investments, not only in the technology, but in the offline world. Like, we need social clubs, we need sports leagues, we need third spaces for young people. These are all going to be vital and incredibly crucial points of infrastructure that will allow us to deal with the mental health epidemic and the waves of loneliness that are going to continue to hit as AI keeps increasing, as technology keeps advancing more rapidly than the science can help design these apps to be safer and more effective for young people.
Thank you all so much. We have a new question in the chat. Can you discuss the value of intergenerational work and how to create spaces that support dialogue between young people and supportive elders? And Rihanna, I'm looking at you because I think if you want to start with some of your slides, or you can start with discussion, I think this is something you think about a lot.
So it's interesting because what I would show you up here is not intergenerational, which was really tough for us to come to say this body of work has existed for decades around how Black families talk to each other about race and racism. Like, there was always this adult, this trusted adult that was guiding or shepherding young people to the answer. But then when we started doing our own research, we saw young people talking to parents like, let me teach you a thing or two about what I'm experiencing, what I'm learning, particularly if there's a immigrant element to it, right? So if young people are born here and they're teaching their parents who were not born here some of the things that they're facing in this incredibly odd racialized space that they may not have come from, young people know, they're learning, they're teaching, they're the ones as well. So it took us a while to move away from, we need a parent to be the one to, even as a therapist, like I am the one socializing, but the young person is guiding themselves and doing a lot of that work. So I'll just, I'll speak more to that, but I'll just quickly have this on in the background. So this is an app that we developed for young people to essentially skip the parent, because I really want to emphasize Gael's point here. Like, as much as our research shows it is parent-led, parents are also in a space now where they are engaging in the world in different ways than young people. We're in a very new space where communication may be challenged for a number of people because we have become reliant on devices that make us less communicative with each other. So we may not be having those conversations that we were having at the dinner table a few decades ago because folks are here, right? Like, that just may be what it looks like at tables. So how can we help young people, if they want to learn, if they're the ones already doing the teaching, if they're the ones having the questions, how do we help support them if they're not having that intergenerational conversation, which is very important. So I don't want to lose the thread there. Very important, but it's not happening in the same way. So we, with young people, developed this app called Teens Navigating the Talk, and it's for folks. This is obviously not the scale that I typically use, so I'm sorry if it looks a bit wonky, but because young people told us that they want to just describe how it is that they're feeling when they come on the app, the first screen that we have is just an assessment of how they're doing that day. And the pathway that we go on, this knowledge, awareness, and skills, is all scientifically based. You got to know what the issue is, you got to feel it in your body, and you got to know what to do with it. So that's our scientific. If I showed you the theoretical model that my postdoc mentor and I developed, it would be based on that. So we're just creating the language that's more useful for young people, right? Knowledge, awareness, and skills. And then from that, we give elements of psychoeducation and knowledge. So we will gamify that. Can you get this question right? You get points, moves you through the application. For awareness, we have tons of things like videos. We have young people talking to other young people so that they're like, this is where I saw it in my environment, where are you seeing it in yours? So you have elements of, oh, I recognize that now either in my body or in my society. I also have experienced that racism. If what is catching young people's attention, and let me just say as an elder, it is terrifying when I look over at young people who are scrolling within microseconds and I'm like, how do you even know what videos you want to watch?
I'm very guilty of that.
God,
it's like, it's not good.
It's terrifying. But it's, it's this knowledge that videos can be engaging. So even the science of what does that first still need to look like so that they're actually going to watch it versus having a dark screen that then transitions into something else, they're going to just scroll past it. So even putting videos on there, I know we're probably already outdated on that, but That's just a view of what it would look like if a young person was trying to navigate it on their own. But intergenerational conversations, super important. It's so important for us to make sure that adults are also getting some of the same interventions we would hope young people have. I'll just say that gingerly.
Yeah, so I completely, 100%, a lot of these conversations between generations, across generations, aren't happening increasingly because of the role that technology is playing and how people are, and especially youth, are accustomed to interacting. One way that we've attempted to, or that we are attempting to circumvent this, is by creating digital tools and single session interventions in particular that teach nuggets of cross-generational communication. So a postdoc in our lab right now, Dr. Erica Scody, who will soon be faculty at Northwestern, is currently in the process of testing a single session digital self-guided tool that parents and youth get, they both get sort of a version of the same program and do it together. And a youth can opt into this program and invite their parents or their caregiver to take part as well. Erica designed this specifically for rural teens who have limited access to in-person mental health supports, but it teaches evidence-based relationship building and communication skills around how to share about mental health challenges and needs for support. And we pursued this line of research in our intervention work primarily because a lot of teens, the number one barriers that teens were sharing with us in interviews with hundreds of adolescents experiencing depression and anxiety was, I can't talk to my parents about what I'm going through. I can't disclose this. They won't understand. I don't even know where to start. I don't want to be invalidated or laughed at. Other teens were saying, I don't want to burden my family members with my difficulties. There's already so much for them to deal with and so much going on. So we developed this intervention primarily in response to that of, we don't know where to start. We don't know how to communicate or what to say in a way that feels safe. So I think providing guardrails and scaffolding for that initial conversation about, here's what's going on with my mental health, here's language I can use to share it from both angles, even if you're starting from an individual place of here's something for youth, here's something for caregiver, providing the space and providing the first step to help those conversations happening is, I think, something that digital technology can be really helpful with. And we're finding really exciting stuff in our first randomized trial of this intervention, and I'll share more of it soon. But yeah, I think that's one way that digital technologies that start as individual self-guided tools can actually foster off-ramps to real-world conversation.
I want to add that I love the idea of digital mental health tools, and I love the development of this. And I've always been curious because as someone that also spends a lot of time in the tech space and in the startup world, I know that consumer social apps are hard. And many of the tools that get developed are very much teen-facing. You know, the idea is the teen will pick up the app, they will start using it consistently, and it will improve their mental health. And I do believe that with controlled and just with consistent use, it does help, but you know, it's hard making a sticky product that teens actually use. It's incredibly difficult. And so I'm just curious, I just want to know, because my only concern sometimes is, how do you create lasting impact, right? And so I would love to just hear more about that, yeah.
Okay, let's talk about it. So you're right, stickiness in digital mental health apps, engagement is like the problem that digital mental health researchers and app developers talk about. I think we have this problem all wrong, because the goal that we're talking about that people sort of automatically attract to is, how do we get people to do more of this? How do we get people to stay on the app, do more, and stick around longer? That is more money for app developers. And it's, as psychotherapists and psychotherapy researchers, we're used to being taught as psychotherapists that change can only happen over long periods of time if you engage in therapy for a long time. The data does not support that hypothesis at all. Treatment length is not associated with treatment outcome consistently. And in fact, the data from more than 400 randomized controlled trials show that even brief interventions, if properly targeted, specifically single session interventions, can have effects that last months or weeks to months later, up to a year later in some studies. So I want to just push back on the assumption and the idea that change cannot happen in a moment, because it can. And I think anybody, or a lot of people, and this is, I wrote a book on sort of brief interventions called Little Treatments, Big Effects, and a whole chapter is dedicated to people who've went through mental health journeys and the turning points that shifted their trajectory of healing and coping. A lot of people can point to specific moments, conversations, experiences that changed their perspective in a way that had a downstream ripple effect on future outcomes. And in terms of how to create something that can have that ripple effect, we've landed on a few different components and a few different, actually, social psychological theories that can point us in the right direction. One that we come back to a lot and that we see as actually helping to explain change in our single session interventions is called self-determination theory. What self-determination theory suggests is that all humans, no matter who we are, what we're struggling with, have core needs to feel like we are competent, that we have skills to navigate our environments, to feel like we are autonomous, that what we do matters for what happens next, that we can control our worlds in some way, and relatedness, that we have support, understanding, and validation from others, and that people understand where we're coming from and where we want to go. Interventions that can help, not fully, but even partly, fill those basic needs can help spur positive behavior change in a direction that matters, given the right scaffolding in the right direction. So what our single session interventions are designed to do is help people feel a little bit more autonomous, to understand their power to make change in their lives, to feel a little more competent. So we teach them a specific skill and have them make an action plan for getting one step towards a goal that feels personally meaningful to them, and to feel related. So in our interventions, we include personal narratives and testimonials and stories from others who've been there and who understand, to help people feel like somebody else gets where I'm at and where I want to go, so maybe there's hope for me to do the same. We also ask teens in our single session interventions to give anonymous advice to others. And this is really important because this allows teens, one, to draw on their own coping experiences and perspectives to help future users of the intervention feel more connected and hopeful. And it also helps people kind of solidify the fact that, wow, I've already done things in my own life to cope. I already have experiences that are relevant for coping, and now I can help others do the same. So interventions that can help people feel a little bit more autonomous, competent, and related can help people take that best next step towards a future that matters to them. And even though that intervention is only going to be the next step, it can help people pivot to a path where they're more likely to take other steps. So I think it's important to think about these interventions as creating meaningful moments for people that can open new doors they didn't know existed to change that can happen in their futures. Not as, one-shot solutions, we're all done after we do this intervention, but rather as like helping people take that best next step as and when it's needed.
Just very briefly, I agree 99.999% with what Jess is saying. Because I'm here, I think it's really important to ensure that we are very mindful of where that case may not always fit. And so I want to name that belongingness is often an intervention that social psychologists encourage us to think about, even very brief elements of an intervention for belongingness. And there's a story about a young man who was here, I believe it was 2015 or 16, who was on the corner and had an experience where he was identifying himself as a UVA student. Like, he was having an altercation with a bouncer. He was on the ground bleeding and saying, but I'm at UVA. I'm at UVA. I go here. Instead of being a part of the town. He was saying, I belong. But because he identified in a way in his mind where other people didn't see him identifying, he had this conflict of, you're going to face discrimination throughout your life because of how others see you, regardless of how you see yourself. I'm only naming that because with certain interventions that are about how all of us can have self-determination, competence, et cetera. And those are I use SDT theory for sure in my own work, and I support a lot of what Jess just said. There are nuances, and it's really important for us to be able to say, here's how, when we create the single session intervention for racial socialization, we have to be mindful of these things and why maybe either a one shot or this specific element of just belongingness may not be the approach that we need to face, and there are other things that we need to be mindful of given society, given what other people are doing, right?
So that was some of the feedback that we got from teens when we were co-designing a single session intervention for sexual and gender minority young people, was these skills are great and being in the world is really hard. And there are laws that make the world hard for us that no matter what we believe, that's not going to change. And so what we did is we took that feedback and co-designed a new single session program for these teens called Project Rise. And what Project Rise does is it actually teaches them about minority stress theory. And how it's not fair that there are certain aspects of this world that aren't going to be friendly, that aren't going to be easy, and they're going to exist, and there are ways to cope in spite of that and flourish in spite of that, despite the fact that it's not fair and you shouldn't have to cope with these things in the first place. So I think it's critical, you're absolutely right, to name the limits of what self-determination can do, and give people tools to navigate in a world where that won't always be enough. And I do think that these brief interventions can be tailored to validate a lot of those experiences, but it has to be named explicitly, and that's only going to happen through thoughtful co-design with the young people who are being affected.
So we know that disparities exist in mental health outcomes, right? Youth of color, youth with other minoritized identities are less likely to receive treatment and to benefit from treatment. And we know that digital technology has the potential to help reduce some disparities in youth mental health outcomes by reaching youth who may not otherwise have access to therapy. But something that Jessica brought up that I want to follow up on is if we have 20,000 apps in the App Store, which is about what we have right now, if not more, it can be pretty impossible to log on and figure out, okay, well, what works? What am I supposed to download? What do I focus on? You may download one, try it once, it doesn't work, you move on. How do we actually reach youth with these digital tools, not just the apps, but the single session interventions? How do we make an impact here?
So I'm happy to share what we've done. As Brianna was saying before, none of our work is going to matter if we stay in our little academic bubble and don't reach across to different sectors and different corners of how people are trying to reach youth and integrate our efforts because that's going to multiply our impact. So what our lab has done is we have a bunch of strategic partnerships with digital mental health nonprofits, with companies, and even with some social media organizations to embed digital mental health supports directly into the platforms that teens are already going to and using to cope, rather than relying on them to go to the App Store and somehow sift through all of the options, which is going to be virtually impossible. One example of our work here is with a digital mental health nonprofit called COCO. COCO is an organization that contracts with digital mental health companies to directly embed supports into platforms that teens are already on, like Tumblr, Discord, even WhatsApp. What COCO does is they've developed these algorithms for detecting risk so that when youth enter search terms like related to suicide or therapy or self-harm or depression, COCO pops up and offers them a resource right away. And we teamed up with COCO because we thought that the single session self-guided interventions that we developed would be a really good fit for their deployment model, basically serving people interventions in a just-in-time way, right when those moments of need occur, right when that initial outreach or treatment seeking happens. So what we did is we partnered with COCO. We adapted our digital single-session interventions to fit within their platform. That involved shifting them from being about 15 to 20 minutes to complete to being about 5 minutes, because that's how long somebody will do something if they're not being paid for it as part of a study. Therefore, that's how long the interventions had to be. So we narrowed our interventions down to 5 minutes, and we deployed them through Tumblr. This was our first study. And thousands of teens use them, and we found equivalent effects in that Tumblr-based deployment of our behavioral activation single session intervention, which basically teaches teens that what you do shapes how you feel. And you always have the power to put one foot in front of the other and take one step towards coping in a way that feels right for you and to battling depression in a new way. We found equivalent effects to those that we had seen in randomized controlled trials in reducing hopelessness for that intervention. That reached 6,000 teens in a year. We're now working with actually COCO and the state government in Montana to create an improved digital mental health experience in COCO, where youth can not only be on-ramped to single-session interventions through their interactions with social media, but also be off-ramped to community resources through those digital single-session interventions if they want more support or if they're not sure where to go next. So I think, speaking to things that have come up on the panel already, figuring out how to reach youth where they're at by going where they are rather than hoping they'll find stuff that we create and put somewhere else, and making it easy to connect that digital piece to a real world next step is going to make it so that we have sort of an integrated system and hopefully reach more youth without having to rely on them to go seek out stuff on their own.
We have a question in the chat that follows up on that I'd like to hear some of you, especially Gail, I'd love to hear your perspective here. But we've been thinking about these just-in-time interventions, which basically use tools like AI to detect potential risks. So this can be based on things like what a participant or what a person is typing into their phone, their kind of different phone app usage, and then deliver an intervention. And the question is, I just went away from here. What are the potential privacy surveillance-related concerns that youth might bring up? And do those outweigh the potential benefits of getting a potential intervention delivered to your phone when you need it?
It's funny that I think a lot of youth don't care too much about privacy. You know, I don't know what the data says, but speaking from just simply what I see on the internet constantly is youth are kind of like... The general attitude among the generation is, well, they already have all of our data. If it's giving me better ads, at least it's ads that I'm interested in, and privacy isn't the biggest concern. There's a few outliers who, you know, even Face ID kind of like freaks them out a little. The idea of someone having those details about, you know, being spied on, etc. But it seems to me that the general attitude is like privacy isn't the biggest concern for younger generations, at least the general majority. And that seems to be kind of like an older generation type of thing, which is probably just as you kind of mature, you start to think about these things a little bit more.
Yeah. Would anyone else like to comment?
Yeah, I think that, so services like COCO are things that are opt-in. So nobody's being signed up for these services without sort of going through a process where they learn what it is and saying, yes, I'd like support around this. I do think in terms of, you know, whether we should take a more public health approach and essentially require platforms to have these supports built in, that's a different question, and it does raise a lot of important privacy concerns. At the same time, the you know, concerns around, like, you know, data being sold to companies, I think that's a very different set of challenges than should your search terms be filtered through an algorithm to predict whether you might be at risk or something. Because that doesn't actually require any personal information at all. It does require personal information if you choose to be connected with, let's say, a local community resource. Then you'd have to input your, you know, geographic information or something. But I think as long as it's transparent in the way that your information is being used, the way it will and won't be shared with others, and as long as youth are involved in talking through how that should be presented, I think we're okay. And by that I mean, nobody reads the terms and services, right? Like, you scroll through and you click yes and you go to the next page. So I do think there needs to be a serious conversation of how can we communicate the limits of privacy and the what you're agreeing to or not agreeing to when you engage in a digital mental health tool in a way that, like, a 16-year-old is going to read, or even an adult for that matter. I don't know anybody who reads those things. So I do think communicating around you know, disclosure of privacy concerns is really important, and probably going to have to evolve beyond what we've done so far.
Thank you all. We have about 13 minutes left, so I want to open it up to anybody. You can raise your hand if you have any questions for our panelists. I have more, but feel free. Yes, thank you, Bethany.
Yeah, fantastic.
We have a microphone. Thank you.
Fantastic conversation. Really, really appreciate it. I wonder if each of you can share your perspective on how a person's readiness for change intersects with sort of the approaches that you've each chosen, and how you think about not just sort of the idea of, often I get frustrated because I hear from clinicians the idea of, well, they just weren't ready for change. And in viewing it as though, well, that's your problem to solve. Like, why don't you get better before you come see me, and then I'll, then you'll be ready to work with me, right? And of course, that's problematic. And so how do we think about readiness for change, the intersection of when we introduce this, and how we help to help people to be in a place where it's a good time for them to kind of engage?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Such a great question, and it's so in the work that we've engaged in, where there are 5 sessions that we invite a parent, a child, and clinicians to engage in 90-minute sessions. So it's very intensive, lots of resources, a ton of time and engagement. Sometimes we catch families in their 3rd, 4th, or even 5th session with us that are like, oh, that was discrimination I was facing, eh? So now they're at the end of this therapeutic treatment with hundreds of minutes that have already been, poured into it, and we have resource booklets for them. We have all this information on the back end, but that awareness, that coming to of what this thing is, we don't want to force feed them immediately, like, here's something that you have to know that you've gone through. We want them to be able to come to that awareness, which is where the challenge is in this truncated 15-minute app experience that we've developed. We're giving definitions of, this is the knowledge of what racism or discrimination is, and for some people they may go through the entire app and not resonate with any of that, because again, in some of our experiences, it just takes time for them to come to that. So it could be that the app may not be at the place where they are, and it's insufficient for us to just say, like, well, that's too bad. We certainly would want to be able to find ways to come back to them, or to, our hope is to create community, to create follow-up spaces in that app where we're continuing the conversation, and then they could actually start the app over where it could benefit them. But it is a constant challenge for us to show people, this is what happened to you, and this is what you're going through, and you need support for that. Rather than coming to that awareness. So great question, one that we're still struggling with, and one I just wanted to kind of share where that tension is for us, that even when you spend hours and hours with folks, if the society is trying to tell you this is not happening to you, or there's no benefit to describing your own discriminatory or racist experiences because you're just pulling a card, or if you're being told all these things all the time, you too may want to say, well, this is not something I'm experiencing. It doesn't help me to say that. So it might take different approaches that we're trying to figure out how to contend within our own research.
Dr. Anderson,
Oh, me.
I have a question for you. Love your work. I was wondering if you could talk about how the importance of your work is so paramount in how you're navigating, right, like teaching youth coping with racism and discrimination to reduce mental health challenges at a time when we're living during an era, like, not only are people of color, primarily Black and brown, being gaslighted, but the way in which the culture wars have brewed such in our country. At the district level, you have districts that are unable to say the words equity, unable to say the words inclusion. And certainly, they argue, we could build an agenda, an equity agenda, without saying it, but how, without calling a thing, right? Like, attacking disparate impact and disproportionality at a time, right? Like when our children are facing these challenges head on, and as you mentioned, the data is staring us directly in the face.
Yeah, no, it's such a great question, and I'll start with data consistently show talking about race and racism is beneficial. We'll start there, which means for any district or state that's not choosing to talk about it or is excluding to talk about it, they are harming all children, not just those of color, but anyone who could benefit from that therapeutic practice of talking about it, they're being harmed. We know that. So we can either put a lot of resources into fighting education, which we should, and I know Youth-Nex has, Curry affiliation, so like, yes, educators, that's a space for us to be in. I'm a psychologist, so I can't create other spaces and places for those conversations to still happen. So I'm gonna find every path around the school to say, while y'all are struggling with this, let me have this app so this young person, when they get out of school, can still talk about it. Let me have this program where the family can enroll so they can come see me and talk about it. Let me have this TV show. Let me do all the teaching in other spaces, because we know that it's important and therapeutic to do that. So I think we all have a role in this space to be able to fight that incredibly archaic and non-scientific demonstration of power and fear, frankly, to have those conversations in classrooms and libraries and things of that sort. But it's only one lane. So how can we get in our own lanes to do what we've been trained to do? And I'll take a point of privilege here. You started the conversation by talking about how my work helps with Black folks coping. I've been assailed by everybody up and through for the past decade, like, the real issue is racism, so why are you helping people to cope with this thing that exists? As a trained clinical psychologist, I have skills in coping strategy, so that's what I'm doing. It is one method that I'm doing to help young people to say, this is what's happening in the world, so let's talk about that, let's process that, that's what I know how to do. And over time, I've seen that that's insufficient. So my work that's coming out is gonna be policy level stuff. My work is how do we scale? Like I have said, this is what my training is, and there may be limitations to that, so I now need to partner with people in different sectors or in different spaces so that I can't make an excuse that, oh, well, we just can't talk about it in class, so sorry, we can't do this really important, scientifically backed work. That's not enough. But what I'll start by saying is, thank you, and we each have a responsibility in the ways that we've been trained to do the work that we can do to support areas where we know our young people are being prevented from doing this life-saving work.
Question.
Thank you. YMCA Pekai. My question would be subject around the immigrant youth, the immigrant teenager. Earlier on, Dr. Rena mentioned a little bit of it. I have a teenage son who I'm having issues with, a lot of grappling issues. Is there any specific app that help this immigrant youth community around the country for their mental health and the conflict they also have with their family? The immigrant community or family comes with a value, comes with religion. My son asked me a question one time, went to high school, came home, and said, why is, it's a racial connotation, white people treating their children this way, and you are treating me that way? I said, Suleiman, his name is Suleiman, we have a culture, we have a value. The way he or she is socialized is different from us. You were 17, you come with values. Why not hold on to those values and the religion, our beliefs? You can still honor, respect their value. It's an intersection. It's a crossroads Johnson he's trying to navigate and fit. Go to school, learn things, ask me questions. We are different. But respect what they have, respect what you have, put it together, fit. But I see he's grappling with these, for lack of a better word, mental crisis, in a sense, to satisfy his peers at school and to come satisfy his family. So there's this family conflict. So what is the work of scholarship the panelists have either dealt with in the past or is maybe in the lab trying to help that immigrant youth navigate and better fit into the situation we're into?
I think this is exactly the type of situation where peer-to-peer support is so crucial. These are the things that you as a young person, us as young people, and I myself come from an immigrant family, and I've dealt with a lot of things like first-gen guilt and shame and learning how to prioritize my own needs when my own family is suffering. And consistently, I have seen again and again that these are very, very top-of-mind issues for a lot of immigrant youth. I mean, every time I mention anything about this skill, it gets millions of views, thousands of likes, because it's a real struggle, especially in the current climate that we're in, and with everything that has happened over the last couple of years and how much more divided we are now. There's a couple of things that I think are really important to invest in during this time, and one is, young people are obviously, when young people face crisis, they are no longer really turning towards traditional resources like therapists or counselors for various reasons. They're going towards their friends and their family and their immediate circle, but we're in a loneliness epidemic, and we have to think ahead of where are they going to turn to when they don't have a friend to talk to about this. It's going to be the internet, and specifically it's going to be media. It's going to be digital creators. It's going to be apps like, forums, where really it all boils down to they are searching for people with lived experience such as their own. And this is the type of media that I myself am very passionate about creating. It's the reason we started our podcast, because sometimes just the impact of hearing there is someone else going through the issues that you are is incredibly healing. And there is power in that community healing. And so these are the times where we need to uplift voices and empower youth. This comes at, how do you implement things like something as simple as a podcasting class in high school? Can every high school have a podcast where the students talk about their own experiences? It really sometimes boils down to things that are that simple, because oftentimes students might not ask for it, but they will listen to it. And that's for various reasons. Sometimes there's shame around wanting help around these things. I think this is where creators play a really big role. And the reason, we've come a long way from even when I started in 2018. Vulnerability has become such a buzzword, and that didn't exist in 2018. It was very much this era of toxic positivity that we were seeing in the early content creation days of 2017, 2016. But thankfully, I'm very optimistic, because I think we are reaching an era where talking about these issues is a lot more common. There's a podcast seemingly for everything, and a lot of people complain about it. Maybe not everyone needs a podcast mic, but I truly believe most people actually do, and there's so much benefit from every perspective. So the more that we can empower as educators, as community members, our youth to speak and hand them the mic and give them a voice, the better it's going to be for the young people that are struggling and have no one else to turn to, because media is incredibly powerful.
Thanks, Gail. Jenny, if you want to follow up really briefly, I think that was a beautiful place to end. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to our wonderful panelists for that great discussion.